Why are you holding on so tight to things that are crushing you? Why do you cling to people, outcomes, identities that are suffocating the life out of you? There's a freedom that most people never touch because they confuse detachment with not caring, with coldness, with giving up. But what if I told you that detachment isn't about loving less, it's about living more? That the moment you learn to hold everything lightly, you finally experience what it means to be truly free? If you're exhausted from gripping so tightly, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what are you holding on to that's actually holding you back? Sometimes naming the grip is the first step to loosening it. Let me tell you about a revelation Viktor Frankl had that transformed his entire understanding of freedom. In the concentration camps, he watched two types of prisoners. The first type clung desperately to everything, to hope that a specific person would rescue them, to attachment to their old identity, to rigid expectations of how and when they'd be freed. When those specific hopes didn't materialize, when those identities were stripped away, when reality didn't match their expectations, they crumbled. They couldn't survive the gap between what they'd attached to and what actually was. But then there was a second type. They hoped, but they didn't cling to specific outcomes. They loved, but they didn't demand that love look a certain way. They had identity, but they weren't destroyed when circumstances tried to take it. Frankl realized the people who survived weren't the ones who attached harder. They were the ones who learned to hold life with an open hand. They understood that attachment creates suffering, but detachment creates space for survival, for adaptation, for freedom, even in chains. Frankl wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That freedom only exists in detachment." Here's what Andrew Huberman's neuroscience reveals about what attachment does to your brain, and it's going to explain why you feel so trapped. When you attach rigidly to an outcome, a person, an identity, your brain's reward prediction system locks onto that specific target. Your dopamine circuits fire in anticipation of that exact thing happening. But life is unpredictable. Outcomes shift, people change, circumstances evolve. When reality doesn't match your attachment, your brain experiences it as threat and loss. Your amygdala activates, stress hormones flood your system, and you enter fight or flight. You're not just disappointed. You're physiologically dysregulated. But here's what's fascinating. Huberman's research shows that people who practice cognitive flexibility, who can hold preferences without rigid attachment, maintain autonomic nervous system balance even when outcomes shift. Their brains don't interpret change as catastrophe. Detachment isn't emotional numbness, it's neural resilience. You care deeply, but you don't collapse when things don't go your way. That's not indifference. That's mastery. Napoleon Hill spent decades studying successful people, and he found a pattern that contradicts everything our culture teaches about passion and commitment. The most successful people were intensely focused, but emotionally detached from specific outcomes. Hill called it burning desire with flexible strategy. They knew exactly what they wanted, but they weren't married to how it had to happen or when. Edison wanted to create light, but he wasn't attached to the light coming from a specific filament or through a specific method. When one approach failed, he didn't spiral. He detached from that method and tried another. Hill realized attachment to specific pathways creates brittleness. Detachment from pathways while maintaining commitment to purpose creates adaptability, and adaptability is what separates those who achieve from those who break. Hill would tell you, you're not failing because you care too little. You're failing because you're gripping too tight. Loosen your grip on how it has to be, and watch how many ways it can be. Pause and like this video right now if you've ever sabotaged something beautiful by needing it to be a specific way. And comment, what would freedom look like for you if you stopped controlling outcomes? Let's imagine liberation together. Neville Goddard approached detachment from the realm of consciousness and manifestation, and what he taught will revolutionize how you create your life. Goddard said, assume the wish fulfilled, then detach. Most people get the first part. They imagine what they want. They feel the feeling of having it, but then they ruin it by obsessively checking, by desperately grasping, by needing to see evidence immediately. Goddard would say that desperation is doubt in disguise. When you truly know something is yours, you don't clutch at it. You assume it's already done, and you move through life from that assumption. Detachment isn't giving up on your desire. It's the ultimate expression of faith in your desire. You plant the seed in consciousness, and then you leave it alone to grow. You don't dig it up every day to check on it. Goddard taught, live in the end result, but detach from when and how it arrives. Your job is the internal assumption. The universe's job is the external manifestation. When you try to control both, you block both. Detachment creates the space for magic to happen. Let me tell you about Marcus. For 15 years, he was attached to a specific vision of his life: the successful business, the perfect marriage, the respected reputation in his community. He gripped that vision so tightly that when his business failed, when his marriage ended, when his reputation crumbled, he didn't just lose those things. He lost himself. He spiraled into depression because his entire identity was attached to those specific outcomes. At rock bottom, a therapist asked him a question that changed everything. Who are you when you have nothing to hold on to? Marcus didn't have an answer. So he spent a year learning to sit in the void, learning to be someone without achievement defining him, learning to value himself independent of external validation. And in that process of detachment, something miraculous happened. He started a small consulting practice, not to prove anything, just because he enjoyed the work. He started dating again, not to find the one, just to meet people. He rebuilt friendships, not to be respected, just to connect. And within 3 years, his life was more successful than it had ever been. But this time, he held it all lightly. He told me, "I finally understand. The tighter I held my old life, the faster it slipped away. Now I hold everything with an open hand. And everything stays because it wants to, not because I'm forcing it." Huberman's research on stress and the autonomic nervous system explains exactly what happened to Marcus. When you're in rigid attachment, your nervous system is in chronic sympathetic activation. You're perpetually scanning for threat to what you're attached to. Am I losing it? Is it slipping away? Is someone taking it from me? This creates a feedback loop of anxiety that actually pushes away what you're trying to hold. But when you practice detachment, your parasympathetic nervous system can engage. You're in rest and digest rather than fight or flight. And from that calm state, you make better decisions, you attract rather than repel, you create rather than defend. Detachment isn't about caring less, it's about trusting more. Trusting yourself, trusting the process, trusting that what's meant for you will stay and what's not will leave, and both are perfect. Frankl would tell you that attachment is actually a subtle form of control, and control is the opposite of freedom. He wrote about hyper-intention and hyper-reflection. The more desperately you try to make something happen, the more it eludes you. He saw this with prisoners who were obsessively attached to being freed by a specific date. When that date passed and they were still imprisoned, many died within days, not from physical causes, but from the psychological collapse of their rigid attachment. Frankl realized attachment creates vulnerability. Detachment creates resilience. When you can say, "I prefer this outcome, but I'll find meaning regardless of what happens," you become unbreakable. No circumstance can destroy you because your well-being isn't dependent on any single thing going your way. That's not apathy. That's freedom. Hill would make this ruthlessly practical. He'd tell you to examine every area of your life where you're suffering, and you'll find rigid attachment underneath. Suffering in relationships? You're attached to someone being a certain way instead of accepting who they actually are. Suffering in career? You're attached to a specific timeline or recognition instead of focusing on the work itself. Suffering financially? You're attached to money as identity instead of seeing it as a tool. Hill would say, detachment doesn't mean you stop working toward goals. It means you stop making your peace dependent on achieving them. You do the work, you make the effort, but your happiness exists now, not in some future outcome. That shift, from outcome-dependent happiness to process-based fulfillment, is the difference between chronic suffering and sustainable success. Goddard would take you into the practice right now. He'd say, imagine yourself completely free. Not free because you got what you wanted, but free because you're no longer enslaved to needing anything external to complete you. Feel what that freedom feels like. Assume it's already true. Because here's the paradox Goddard understood. When you detach from needing something, you often receive it. Why? Because need is repellent. Need says, I'm incomplete without this. Detachment says, I'm whole with or without this. And wholeness is magnetic. People, opportunities, outcomes are drawn to those who don't desperately need them. Goddard taught, assume the feeling of wish fulfilled, then let it go. That letting go isn't rejection, it's trust. It's knowing that what's yours will find you without force. Right now, I want you to identify one thing you're white-knuckling. One person, outcome, identity you're terrified to release. Now ask yourself, what would I gain if I loosened my grip? Drop your honest answer in the comments. Let's explore what's on the other side of attachment. Here's what happens when you finally learn detachment. First, there's fear. Your ego screams that if you stop controlling, everything will fall apart. That if you stop clinging, you'll lose everything. That fear is real, but it's not truth. It's the death rattle of control. Breathe through it. Second, there's space. Suddenly your nervous system isn't in constant vigilance mode. Your mind isn't racing with anxious thoughts about holding everything together. You have bandwidth for presence, for creativity, for actual living rather than constant managing. Third, clarity arrives. When you're not clouded by desperate attachment, you see situations and people clearly. You notice what's actually working versus what you're forcing. You recognize what authentically belongs in your life versus what you're clutching out of fear. And then, the most liberating thing happens. You realize you're still you without the things you were attached to. Your identity doesn't collapse. Your worth doesn't evaporate. You're whole without the relationship, the achievement, the validation, the outcome. And in that wholeness, something shifts in how you move through the world. You're no longer desperate. You're no longer performing for approval. You're no longer compromising yourself to keep things that were never yours to keep. You become magnetic because you're no longer needy. You become powerful because you're no longer dependent. You become free because you're no longer imprisoned by attachment. Frankl survived hell because he detached from specific outcomes while maintaining deep meaning. He didn't know if he'd survive, if he'd see his wife again, if his life's work would matter. But he didn't attach his will to live to any of those specific outcomes. He found meaning in the moment, in helping another prisoner, in appreciating a sunset, in choosing his attitude. That detachment from specific external outcomes while maintaining attachment to internal values, that's what saved him. And it's what will save you. Hill would remind you that every failure he studied, every business that collapsed, every person who broke, underneath it all was rigid attachment. Attachment to a specific strategy that was no longer working. Attachment to pride that prevented adaptation. Attachment to how things should be instead of dealing with how things are. The successes? They all had one thing in common. They could pivot, adapt, release what wasn't working without releasing their core vision. Detachment from the non-essential allowed them to protect the essential. Goddard would tell you this mystical truth. What you're attached to, you're actually pushing away. Your attachment creates an energetic desperation that repels. But what you detach from with love, meaning you release it, you bless it, you let it be free, often returns transformed. Or something better replaces it. Or you realize you never needed it in the first place. Goddard taught, detachment is the highest form of love. You love something enough to not imprison it with your need. You love yourself enough to not imprison yourself with dependency. That mutual freedom is what allows genuine connection, genuine success, genuine fulfillment. Here's the practice. Start small. Notice where you're gripping. In a conversation where you need to be right. In a situation where you need a specific outcome. In a relationship where you need someone to change. And consciously release your grip. Not with bitterness, with love. Say internally, I release my attachment to how this must be. I'm open to what actually is. Feel your nervous system relax. Notice what shifts when you stop trying to control. Do this repeatedly, in small moments, and you're training detachment as a skill. And here's the ultimate paradox that Frankl, Hill, and Goddard all understood from different angles. When you become free through detachment, you don't lose your capacity to love, to work, to dream. You increase it, because now you're doing those things from wholeness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than desperation, from freedom rather than fear. You love more fully because you're not clutching. You work more effectively because you're not paralyzed by attachment to specific outcomes. You dream more boldly because failure can't destroy you. You're already free. If this is shifting something in your chest, if you're feeling the grip start to loosen, like this video, share it with someone who's suffering from their own attachments, and subscribe because we're walking the path of liberation together. Tell me in the comments, what are you finally ready to release? What are you going to hold with an open hand from now on? Let's practice freedom together. I'll see you in the next one.